He lightly tapped the portal. The surface rippled, and he stepped through. In a blink he was there, where Rocky and his friends were earlier. There are places on Earth and Alfiga that are directly connected. These places are known as portal loxes. Portal loxes come in pairs, with one portal lox on Earth always being paired with a portal lox on Alfiga. If a dimensional portal is opened in a portal lox zone, it shall transport you to its pair. The Alfegans would often construct important buildings on portal lox zones as a safety net of sorts, an emergency exit door. The Caravantian castle was partially built on a portal lox, and its pair was the one and only park within our town, Majestia Park. Oliver found himself next to an elegant three-tiered fountain. It was quaint. The bottom tier was at his thigh, and its rim was thick and long enough to allow 12 people to sit around it. The water trickling down was clear, and where it pooled was clean, besides a fallen autumn leaf that was coasting the water. There were wooden benches circling the fountain, just before the greenery started. Grey and pastel pink stones were in a pattern beneath his feet. The stones encompassed the fountain for a couple of meters before the grass and foliage started. The grass and foliage were mainly enclosed by a tall curved stone wall with a single exit. The remaining grass and foliage either led to a small playground or to a wide stretch of fields and woods, where people would often picnic, camp, and barbecue. And if you tracked further up those woods, you'd arrive to where the rich reside. There was nothing else except him, the sound of cool water, and a still, serene, moonless sky. How he wished the moon, his lifelong friend, was here with him in this strange, alluring new world. He was alone once again. No one else was there. It was to be expected. It was nearly midnight on a school night. It had been an hour or two since the castle gates had fallen. Although he didn't fight during the battle on the castle grounds, he was tired. He was so tired. He hadn't given his body a chance to relax, but something about this place forced him to be at ease, and he realized just how much everything hurt. But this world was somehow rejuvenating. He stood soaking in the splendor of his surroundings, letting the coldness crawl on his skin. He felt frozen, but something in his chest was beginning to melt. Time seemed slow, but it was not. Soon a familiar voice called out sweetly, "Oliver, father." Oliver turned around in shock. When did you arrive? He didn't sense Chaos's presence. That had never happened before. Had he been letting his guard down this whole time? Why? All right, all right. Chaos laughed a little. I do admit my insignificant task may have taken longer than we both expected. However, I confidently believed my son was more than capable of surviving in a strange new world. So I didn't rush. So what are your first impressions? It's beautiful, serene, and different. Different it most certainly is. Now, I wouldn't expect you to sense it, but Earth is quite deficient in energy. Well, what we'd class as Alfegan energy. Oliver's face fell a little before he managed to mask it. Would he have been able to sense it had his capacity been higher? Had he been stronger? The gloom he was feeling suddenly turned into curiosity. So Earth's deficient too, like me. It was a comforting thought. His father meekly smiled. Now, Oliver. Curiosity is a good thing, but as the Shadow's Knight, it's imperative you remember your place and duties. You should scarcely feel emotions, let alone express them. That is the Sordatian way. Emotions are dangerous. The Sordatian way. Little was known about the Sordatian way, particularly to Oliver. The loyal shadows might have gotten away with the occasional display of excess emotion, but that wasn't the case for the Sordatian ruler and their successor, the Shadow's Knight. Too much emotion was essentially forbidden. which wasn't ideal for a relationship between a father and a son. Oliver craved his father's approval, his praise. It was all he had ever known, his guide to life, a way to measure if he was ever failing. He was now. I'm sorry. Don't apologize, just improve. Chaos spoke in an icy voice. He then assessed Oliver, and a smile slipped onto his face as his tone lightened. Well, I was going to suggest we start going, but our attire isn't quite usual for this world. He looked down at both of their sordation robes. It's the dead of night, so I'd assume we won't run into any trouble. In fact, tonight's one of the very few nights our outfits may go unnoticed, if I recall correctly. But you know what they say, precaution is better than cure. So you know what to do. Follow my lead. Discretion. Chaos wasn't in his sordation robes anymore. He was dressed as a strict professional, in a black two-piece suit, with a loosely buttoned collared shirt and matching shoes. His silver hair was slicked back. Oliver hesitated for a second. His father had just commanded him to use his gem in a public space, but then again, this was Earth, not Alfega. Perhaps there was a different set of rules. Oliver followed, repeating the word. Discretion. He felt the weight of his clothes lessen as he looked down. He was now wearing an oversized, open-zipped mint hoodie, a white round-necked t-shirt, greenish camo cargo trousers that suited the look, and a pair of mint trainers. Good, Chaos said, observing him. How do I look? You look amazing, father, Oliver remarked, noticing a heavy, light brown pouch hanging from his father's belt. Had that always been there, concealed under his robes? It looked like the type to carry currency gems. Gems are classed into 3 categories: energetic, anti-energetic, and zero rate, with each having positive, negative, or no energy signatures, respectively. Only energetic gems can be used as jewelite gems, and all the Corrivantian jewels are of this type. Anti-energetic gems are used for various miscellaneous tasks, and zero-rate or dead gems are used in Alfega as currency, being the most common type of gem, both on Alfega and Earth. Customarily, if an Alfegan wishes to cross dimensions, measures would be taken to restrict the number of currency gems they may bring across. This is done due to the difference in value of zero-rate gems on Earth compared to Alfega. It also allows the Alfegan world to remain hidden. Chaos was bound by no law, but why was there a need for so much? It seemed they had enough to be multi-millionaires on Earth. Why? As I always do. Chaos received the compliment. Now come on, let's have a tour. They exited the park, turned left and continued northwards, crossing 2 roads. They passed an orphanage on their way to Grovelly Hill High. Looping back from Grovelly, they passed the orphanage once more, and at the end of the pavement, they turned left and started walking down the orphanage's front face. Adjacent to the orphanage was a hilly patch of land and a pet shop that Jas called home, Majestia Pets, which they passed as well on their way to our school, opposite the pet shop, Majestia High. From the school, they went to the main lane, passing by all the shops before turning left to reach the park's boundaries, following the boundary uphill to where the rich resided. But not quite exactly. The road had turned into a peculiar path that seemed forgotten. It winded more than it needed to, and the foliage was overgrown and uncared for. They stopped before a singular solemn bricked house, enshrouded by the woods. The house was very large. It may have been grand once, but now it needed maintenance. Chaos gave Oliver a look before approaching the wooden door. Knock, knock, knock. A light switched on and the door creaked open, revealing a man who appeared in his late 20s. He seemed young by his firm ivory skin, despite having a couple of creases on his face. The creases only really enhanced his youthful charms, but hidden in his bright blood eyes, which were relaxed with experienced wisdom, the right kind of hazy, was the man's real age. He was around Chaos's age. His hair was almost wavy, black with a tinge of red, and probably below his shoulders. Oliver couldn't tell the exact length as the hair was pulled back in a sloppy low ponytail. Yes. He wore a fuzzy jumper, striped thinly with dreamy blues, reds, and a little yellow. In such a manner it made the garment seem mainly a mystic purple. He also wore mustardy plaid pajama trousers, black socks, one short, one long, an emerald wedding ring, and some light grey house slippers. And in his right hand was a mug with a questionable dark hot beverage. Well, questionable to Oliver. Regardless of how charming his face might have been. He was homely. No, more than that, he was tired. Thus the coffee. Bent out, even. So very tired. Oh, forgive me. I didn't realize it was you. Were you expecting someone else? Chaos said, almost seriously. No, the man smiled. Come on in. It's quite cold. Oliver. Chaos called as they made their way in. Come in, come in. Slippers, the man pointed out as the father and son entered the foyer. The pair removed their shoes, placed them onto the rack, and wore the slippers. The slippers were fluffy and matched the ones the man was wearing, and were kneaded with how cold the floor was. Surprisingly, the floor was an almost recent marble, and so were the stairs at a distance ahead of the three. Don't judge a house by its exterior, I guess. The door shut with a big clack, and the man tried his best not to spill his drink. Sorry about the slippers. I usually don't fuss whether people prefer wearing slippers or socks or are even barefooted inside the house. But the floor heating hasn't been working for quite a while. So slippers are a must for now. His eyes met Oliver's. So, Chaos, when were you planning to introduce me? Chaos unbuttoned his blazer, looking back at the man, unamused. If it was up to me, never. But for Oliver's sake. Oliver, this is Kyson Levy. We're his guests for the time being. Oliver gave an acknowledging nod. Ah, I see. We have an Oliver in our midst. An Ollie boy. He looked towards Chaos, expecting some sort of disapproval. There was an annoyed glint in Chaos's eyes, but a tenderness in his voice. Stop teasing. You knew that already. I apologize, he smirked tiredly at Oliver. I did indeed know that. In fact, I prepared accordingly for His Majesty and His Majesty's son. Don't call me that. Why ever not? You of all people know the importance of titles. Isn't that true? He looked between the two. Sordatian ruler, Shadow's knight, future. Enough, Chaos sighed, of your ramblings. What preparations have you made? Well, I prepared the spare guest room for you. As for Oliver, I think you'd find the room made for you is particularly customized. If it's not to your liking, please let me know, and I shall rearrange it at once, or relocate the room as it's currently one of the smaller ones. Oliver nodded. And as for the food? Chaos asked. And as for the food, Kyson intervened. I'm afraid there's not an awful lot for tonight. I have yet to do the groceries, so the best I can offer is whatever's left in the freezer. And coffee. He almost offered his cup to Chaos, but decided against it. Meaning you have no clue what's for dinner. In my defense, Chaos, it's quite late for supper. We fought valiantly for our cause, and yet you couldn't prepare a decent meal for two. You make it sound like I forgot to prepare someone's last meal, he snickered. sharing a look with Chaos, one that Oliver couldn't quite decipher. Well, I guess I ought to make a start on dinner. Though be warned, I've only ever cooked for one. That isn't true, Chaos sighed once more. But I'll help you. Oliver, why don't you locate your new room, and I'll sort out this mess. Okay, he nodded, turning his attention to Mr. Levy. Where will I be able to find this room? Oh, you won't be able to miss it. It's upstairs, that's the only clue I'll give you. Right. Oliver made his way upstairs, and the other two made their way to the first door left of the stairs, where the kitchen was. The bifurcated staircase was huge, with each step feeling so wide. There was a large window where the staircase parted. The view outside was obscured by decades-old curtains that had almost never parted from each other. The railing wasn't quite as polished as Oliver was used to, and needed a deep dusting. But overall, the house was grander than he expected. He eventually made it to the top. The landing was spacious and intensely lit by an excessively bulbed chandelier that caused everything to be soaked in a blaring white light. There were a couple of doors and corridors to choose from. But where was his room? The doors in front of him were closed, and he didn't want to impose and open them without getting the proper permission. So he opted to explore one of the corridors first. As he was walking, he passed an open door and peered in to see if it was the room he was looking for. It wasn't. This room must have been one of the bigger ones, he thought, based on the approximate size of the exterior, and had all its furniture hidden under white sheets. It was preserved and untouched, with cobwebs hanging from the lights. It didn't feel like the right room. Rather, Oliver felt he was intruding somehow, though he hadn't yet stepped into the room. He continued down the corridor and turned towards the left. In the shadowy part of the corridor in front of him, he saw a lonesome door with a plaque that read Oliver's Room. It would have been nice had he been told he was searching for a room with his name on it, he thought. He reached for the handle, took a second, and opened the door. It was a small box room, unlike anything he had ever seen. The walls were painted an almost shiny black, and the carpet was a mixture of dark greys and felt deep. There was an orange basketball-shaped mat sticking out from under the red bed to his left, and a wardrobe next to that ahead of him. On his right was a desk, with shelves above it. The room was filled with all sorts of unfamiliar trinkets that would have belonged to any typical child his age had he been from Earth. They fascinated Oliver, and so did the scratched stickers that laced some of the corners of the wardrobe's door mirrors. Everything looked relatively new in this room, except this wardrobe. The window straight ahead was opened, making its scarlet curtains sway. Something about them allured him. He walked to the window, passing everything by. He needed to look out. He did. He didn't know what he was expecting. A sudden look of remorse dawned his face as he remembered the moon wouldn't have been there. He looked out, wondering and waiting, searching in case he had missed spotting it amongst the stillness of the stars. It was to no avail. His longest companion was no longer there with him. He was in a different world now. Perhaps there was no moon here. Or, more hopefully, it was just one moonless night. He sighed, hoping the latter was true. The sincerity of the sky captivated him, but that was quickly dismantled by Oliver's sense of duty. On a technicality, he had finished his task by locating his room, and now had to report back. He drew a sharp breath, and pushed himself up off from the windowsill he had just been leaning on. This was an opportunity, after all. He wasn't going to fail. He managed to make his way to the staircase with relative ease, and then made his way downstairs. The downstairs lights weren't on anymore. The only main light source seemed to be from the kitchen, and a faint light seeped from the ajar door of the living room opposite. As he approached the kitchen door, Oliver overheard some part of a conversation, blended with a blaring, buzzing sound. The talking wasn't coming from the kitchen, but the buzzing was. What was it? Something smelt off. He examined the kitchen from afar. It was a microwave. Technology he had never seen. It seemed so primitive. They were using this to prepare their meals. Perhaps it made sense to do so, seeing as this world had a lack of energetic crystals. Oliver directed his attention to the door opposite, where the chattering was coming from. He wanted to make his presence known, but he didn't want to interrupt. Should he just wait until a suitable pause occurs to knock on the door and report back? But if he did that, wouldn't he have been breaching the privacy between his father and Mr. Levy by listening further? Not that he was attentively doing so already. Just then, as if he could hear thoughts, Mr. Levy opened the door fully. "Ah, Oliver." He signalled for Oliver to enter the room first. "I'm just going to check the food." Oliver acknowledged Mr. Levy with a nod as he entered the room, and Kyson left. His eyes adjusted to the lamplight. It was dim, and Oliver couldn't quite understand why the room's light wasn't on. Nor could he figure out why half the furniture here was covered. That which wasn't covered seemed old, like the curtains. Even the floor was a sort of old wood, not marble like the foyer. Wood that had been indented and scarred and scratched with a lifetime's worth of memories and moments. He found his father sitting on an uncovered armchair, using a laptop. Again, such old technology. Well, for Oliver at least. Despite the make and model being relatively new for the time, Chaos smiled slightly on Oliver's arrival. "Did you manage to find your room?" "Yes." "Good. As for dinner, I'm afraid it will be quite awful." "Edible, thanks to my help, but still quite awful." "Sorry, son." Oliver shook his head, as if to say it was quite all right, and Chaos propped himself up as he continued. "I've been discussing something with Kyson, and as this mission is likely to be one of a long duration," he looked Oliver in the eyes, "it seems it would be beneficial for you to enroll in one of the schools we passed on our way here." Oliver couldn't believe what he was hearing. Enrolling into a school with others, with peers, people perhaps of a similar age. It sounded unbelievable. The father who had raised him in such explicit isolation was now telling him to join a public school. It was laughable at the very least, but perhaps it wasn't that unbelievable. This world didn't function the same. It was deficient like him. The playing field was now even. He wasn't an anomaly. Not anymore. Not here. Here he had a chance to be an equal. "So, what do you say?" Kyson suggested Majestia High, but ultimately I'll leave the decision with you. The application itself and the approval process won't prove much of a challenge for me. Chaos smiled a knowing smile. Guess whose gem allows them to manipulate technology? Maybe Oliver had wanted something like this, secretly. Maybe some part of him had always wanted something like this. A part that he had buried somewhere so deep when he was so young that he'd forgotten it was even there, until it resurfaced the way that it did. He felt giddy, but he had to hide it. A slight smile, however, perked his face. "I think I'll stick with Mr. Levy's choice." "Smart choice," came a voice from the doorframe. "And please, don't feel the need to keep up with formalities. You're free to call me Kyson, if that's what you prefer, Your Majesty." "That's quite hypocritical. You can't preach about no formalities to Oliver whilst calling him Your Majesty." Chaos closed the laptop, placing it on the footstool ahead of him. "We'll finish off the documents later. As for now, congratulations, Oliver. You're due to start tomorrow morning. It's also high time we eat, or try to consume whatever mess it is that Kyson has made." "It isn't that bad." Kaisen remarked. But the table is set for whenever you're ready. They went to the kitchen. Kaisen served the plates before taking his place at the table as host, with Oliver and Chaos sitting opposite each other. Each plate consisted of 1,000,000,000 peas, fish fingers that were cold at the center, and a slice of overly toasted bread that was close to expiring, if not a day or two already over. Oliver prodded his fork into a defrosted pea. "This is ridiculous," Chaos started, looking onwards at Oliver's plate. "You haven't even provided spoons for these mountains of peas. You can eat peas with forks. Besides, they're all dirty anyways." Chaos glared in response. "What? No spoons are required to eat peas, so no spoons are required to be washed." "I loathe your existence," Chaos murmured. Just then, something sharp pierced Chaos's mind, causing him to drop his cutlery and clench his face. "Dad, are you all right?" Oliver got up to help somehow. He didn't know how to help. He tried to reach his father, but Kaisen was nearer and was more composed. "No need to worry, Oliver. It shall pass." Kaisen was standing next to Chaos now, and Oliver stood still, observing. It seemed Kaisen knew how to help. There, it's all right." Kaisen was just nonchalantly patting Chaos's head. But perhaps it was helping. Chaos's grip loosened. "You're okay. Hurry up and get better. I know you don't like being touched, so you might as well tell me off, or I'll have to continue. And you're scaring Oliver." Oliver shook his head with a fragile no. He wasn't scared. "I'm fine." Chaos sighed, lifting his head to reassure Oliver. His eyes met Oliver's. They were slightly wetter and almost numbed by pain. "I'm okay." He smiled, and Oliver smiled back, more so to play along with his father's pretense than to actually believe it. Kaisen was smiling the most. "Well, that's good. Welcome back. Move." Chaos snarled. "Fair enough." Kaisen raised his hands in defeat and sat back down at the table. "Well, enjoy your peas." He finished off the remainder of his now cold coffee. Chaos glared again, but said nothing. No one said anything for a moment or so. It was silent. They just ate quietly until Chaos resumed the conversation, after having a frozen fish finger. "Oliver." "Yes?" "About the mission. I've mentioned the Caravantian jewels to you, and have told you we're here to find them, correct?" "Yes. What I haven't mentioned is how we're going to do this." He straightened himself up as he continued. "The Caravantians would have used pixies to transport each jewel to Earth. Well, the energy signatures of each. Now I know you haven't had much experience with the pixie kind, nor would you have sufficient knowledge of their biology, so I'll explain a couple of facts. Being creatures of Alphegan energetic origin means they can freely access Alphegan energy. Unlike us, who need gems in order to access it, they store energy in their wings and can obtain and release it on command, thus making them an ideal mode of transport for Alphegan energy. Earth has no native pixies, making the Caravantian pixies stick out like sore thumbs, and most humans on Earth can't even see pixies, which works in our favor when searching for them. However, pixies have the ability to take an animal form using discretion, making it harder for us to spot them. I see. How will we be able to distinguish them from the animals of Earth? By their voices. As we're connected to Alphegan energy and their animal transformation is due to Alphegan energy, we're able to hear them speak. But most on Earth would hear the typical chirping of a bird or the bark of a dog. We will be able to understand them. Oliver nodded, absorbing every part of the briefing. Don't be impatient, though. This is a long-term task. And we still need to sort out your admission. Kaisen sighed, looking at his empty mug with false hope before taking another bite. After finishing dinner, Chaos suggested that Oliver go upstairs to sleep, as the boy had to wake up early for school the next day. Meanwhile, he and Kaisen would finish off the admission. And with that, Oliver retired to an unfamiliar bed, with a bit too much excitement to actually fall asleep. His curtains were wide open, letting the starlight fill the room. That still night sky sealed the last ordinary day for all of us. A light switched on and the door creaked open. Creaked. It's creaked, man. You can read. Come on. I know you can try, okay? I have mild faith in you. Yeesh. How long are we gonna be here? What's the bet? I'm probably gonna switch between Kaisen and Kaisen because I don't even know my accent at this point. I've confused myself too much. Regardless of how questionable his face might have seemed. Whoa, where was I going with that one? Regardless of how charming his face might have seemed, might have been, not might have seemed, might have been, and wore the slippers. I don't know why I was going to say shoes. Oliver, why don't you sort out this mess? The bifurcated. The bifurcated. Girl, I can't do that. Bifurcated. Let's see what the internet says. Bifurcate? It ain't bifurcate. Is it called bifurcate? Or are you lying to me? It is bifurcated. Oh, that's a bit ugly. I don't know if I like that. His eyes adjusted. God, what are you doing? What? Excuse me, what? Bye. Bye. Live La Flora. Bye.